A very good afternoon and many thanks for staying with us right here on NTV Uganda. My name is Romeo Busiku. Well, I'm here to talk about the human rights situation within the country, largely focusing on the 24th annual report of the Uganda Human Rights Commission that was actually authored, that is on Monday this very week. Well, according to the report, the Uganda Police and the Army are the biggest human rights violators within the country. In its 21st, 22nd and 23rd annual reports, courtesy of the Uganda Human Rights Commission, the Commission actually made 289 recommendations to the 32 ministries, departments and agencies within this country on compliance to human rights. But guess what? Only 75 out of the 289 recommendations were complied with, accounting for 26%, and almost 74% were never complied with or non-compliance in that regard. So what strategies is the Uganda Human Rights Commission laying down to ensure that the MDAs comply with the recommendations that are actually birthed by the Uganda Human Rights Commission? We are here to break up the report, which is comprised of 12 chapters. The first 8 are focusing on thematic issues. The subsequent 3 are focusing on the interventions of the Uganda Human Rights Commission, and the last chapter is focusing on our compliance to international and regional treaty bodies in that regard. In my midst, I'm now joined by Ruth Sechindi. She is the Director of Monitoring and Inspections at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Later on, we shall also be joined by Diana Akampereza. She is a Human Rights Officer working with the same commission, Uganda Human Rights Commission. That is later on. But for now, let's talk to Ruth Sechindi. Many thanks for joining us. A very good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
And indeed, the 12 chapters or so that were birthed by the Uganda Human Rights Commission, that is of Monday, the 24th annual human rights report. We'd like to break down most of the chapters that were, embedded within this report. Chapter number 1, focusing on the human rights violations that actually accrued during the COVID-19 pandemic. What did you actually find out on the ground as far as the pandemic is concerned and the human rights concerns?
Thank you. And I greet all the viewers. When it comes to the pandemic, a number of issues happened, and I hope we learn from the pandemic. When it came to COVID-19, a number of, there were issues around the health. And we found out that COVID exposed issues of access to health, accessibility in the health sector. We established that there was a lot of extortion because during the height of the second wave, there was a lot of extortion to an extent that private hospitals or clinics were charging people to a tune of 100 million. You wonder what it would take for someone to treat another at 100 million shillings.
Yes, a gas cylinder was going for 800,000, that is for oxygen cylinders.
Yes, so it was very expensive. We also noted that there were issues of education. While the children of the rich were studying online, many children of the poor were not studying. We noted that there was discrimination.
Continued learning.
Yes. We noted that it affected many students, and up to now, we are still struggling with the effects of COVID-19 on the right to education. We also noted that there were concerns around teenage pregnancies. Many teenagers, really, when they're out of school, they go for an adventure, they discover themselves, and we found that services such as antenatal and family planning were not readily available. And so we saw an increase and a spike in teenage pregnancies. There were also concerns around employment. Many people lost employment.
I see.
And while government made an effort to provide COVID relief, the people who needed it the most were not considered because we had big numbers of unemployed Ugandans, but these were not considered. Instead, the COVID relief fund targeted those small earners, border riders, the hawkers, salon, but there were those who were not employed at the time COVID struck. So the vulnerable really became more vulnerable. Persons with disabilities also struggled. People with mental illnesses struggled because those ones need support networks, and these support networks were broken, which really became a challenge.
Indeed. So what were the recommendations coming in from the Uganda Human Rights Commission to help government, alleviate this situation?
So the recommendations rotate around recovery. and how we can ensure that there's economic recovery.
Indeed.
And how we, government can support the different sectors of government. And the other recommendation is about preparedness of government, and also ensuring that we have early warning mechanisms around whether it is a pandemic or conflict, so that we are prepared.
In case you go back to a lockdown.
Yes. And now we see that COVID has struck again, and I'm afraid we may not be prepared. Cases
are now going up again, and you feel like we are not prepared.
And if we go by the way it went, I hope that more people are vaccinated, and that it will be a
Does that mean that some of the recommendations you gave to government have not been complied with, and we are not actually readily available to fight another lockdown if it's actually taking center stage?
We are not yet ready to fight another lockdown.
Wow.
It is too soon, and we are still recovering before the pandemic has struck again. So we still have a challenge as a country.
Of course, another challenge pertains to the externalization of labor. We've been exporting some individuals to Middle Eastern countries to go and work, and some human rights concerns have arisen from that situation. According to your investigations, what have you figured out is the cause of this issue, and why does it continue to be compounded as a negative issue right now?
Well, when it comes to externalization of labor, there are always pull and push factors.
Indeed.
And the push factors, majority are unemployment and poverty. And we have found that most of the pull factors or push factors target the illiterate.
I see.
And the women.
They're desperate.
So they're very desperate, and because they don't have work, they really look to the Middle East. But then there's also the issue of lack of a minimum wage, where if you're working as a house help, you're getting 50,000 shillings or 40,000 shillings, and yet when you are going to Jordan, you're guaranteed to get 800,000. Everyone would jump at that. We have seen teachers travel to the Middle East because they were earning 300,000, 250, and they think, and they say, I'm getting 1 million shillings. That's better for me.
So if 1 million was our minimum right here, these individuals wouldn't have to go to such humiliating work.
But then
imagine being a trained teacher, you have a degree and so forth, but you're going to the UAE to clean toilets.
Yes.
And that is demeaning.
Yes. And it wouldn't be bad to travel for employment.
Indeed.
Because it's a government strategy to find alternative employment for Ugandans. As we are looking towards a middle-income state, as we are looking towards the 2030 agenda, as we are looking towards building industries, there are people who are becoming adults, the young adults who need to be employed. And there isn't enough space. NTV can cover so many. Government, public servants can only, it can cover so many.
Indeed.
So that leaves a big chunk of people unemployed. So if the average Uganda is, we called it a child state, and majority, 60-something% are youth and young adults, then that means government had to find a solution. And the solution would be, like the Philippines has done, or China has done, to find work for its citizens outside the country. It's a good thing. However, government had to put in place mechanisms of protecting its citizens. Now, the challenges that we have seen, or the human rights concerns that we have seen out of externalization of labor are immense. There are many. And this includes exploitation. And exploitation comes from their made markets, where you stand and they pick, someone picks. And after taking you, then that person owns you and they can sell you to another person.
More like slavery.
Absolutely.
And it's happening.
So, yes, there's contract substitution. Wow. You go expecting to work in a supermarket. You end up in a farm milking donkeys or whatever it is, or sheep. So it becomes a challenge. There's issues of organ harvesting. These people go when they're very young. You're at your peak, you're 20. All the organs are very alive. And so we've had cases of kidney loss. People have lost organs. We have noted that there are issues of sexual harassment. There's language barrier. They get a culture shock, where there was one girl who knelt for her master or her boss, and the wife beat her to pulp and burnt her. Because for them that was very suggestive. We've had other concerns around confiscation of documents so that you can't travel, and also the fact that when they are affected, when they are violated, they have nowhere to report.
Human trafficking.
Because they also do not know. Now, the cases of human trafficking...
these individuals are being trafficked, yes, under the guise of being promised jobs.
Yes, and we have had issues of human trafficking. Now, Ministry of Gender has done a lot around this. Indeed. And they're trying to protect the Ugandans traveling to the Middle East. This is mainly happening in the Middle East. But unfortunately, we have only 3 contracts with 3 countries, and that is Jordan, United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait, I think. So all the other countries that where we're exporting our children or our youth, we don't have agreements. And that means there's no protective mechanism for our Ugandans in those countries, which remains a challenge. All right, that is Ruth Sechindi, the Director of Monitoring and Inspections at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Yes, and we also are joined by Diana Akampereza. She is a Human Rights Officer, also working with the Uganda Human Rights Commission. We'd like to break down the human rights concerns within Buvuma and Kalangala districts in that regard. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. My name is Diana Akampereza, as I've been introduced. I work also with the Uganda Human Rights Commission, and I'm glad to be here this evening. I would just likely to just give the viewers what we found out in Buvuma as one of our thematic areas that we monitored as a commission.
Indeed.
And there are quite a number of issues that we noted as a commission. And of course, we also gave recommendations to that effect. And the human rights issues in particular, the ones that we found out, are issues of access to justice, where you find they do not have courts, or even the judicial officers do not go there frequently because of the transport. Indeed. The issue of transport being
far-flung.
Yes, very much so. And the issue of infrastructure development, which is really limited, and different like issues of schools which are really scattered. You find like maybe in one island there's only one school, and people cannot travel from their homes to that school.
So access was a major issue. Yes. So these individuals, regardless of the COVID-19 pandemic, yes, they were actually suffering or grappling even before the pandemic.
Yeah, very much so.
I see.
And also the issues of health, of course, also the health facilities not being accessible Indeed. To different people. And of course, the unique status of islands really puts them at a disadvantage in terms of access to social services, and also those other things that they would really enjoy like any other Ugandan. We gave out recommendations, and these recommendations can really be found in our annual report. I would like to interest all of us, the viewers, to have access to our annual report, where you can get copies from our regional offices, or also download it on our website where you can really
But in light of this skyrocketing food, fuel prices, many of the people do not have data to get on the internet and enjoy that luxury of looking for that information. So right here and right now, what kind of recommendations did you come out with to help us alleviate this problem in Buvuma and Kalangala?
Yes, there are quite a number of recommendations, but allow me to just go through them so briefly.
Indeed.
The Ministry of Education and Sports should set up more government-aided and boarding schools facilities.
Perfect.
For in different parishes, so that at least people can access education. The Ministry of Health should upgrade Buvuma Health Center 4 and Kalanga Health Center 4 to hospitals, so that they can cater for and of course be equipped with the staff and the equipment, so that they can be able to provide healthcare services to the bigger communities. And also the issue of the high cost of water transport. Minister of Finance should consider preferential funding modalities for institutions like police, health, that operate in the islands, to facilitate them perform their work so well. Minister of Health should ensure fully facilitated water and land ambulances, so that they are put in place to help reduce on cases of maternal death that occur mostly because of the delayed access to health facilities. Then Ministry of Water and Transport should procure speed boats for islanders to public use, in cases of emergencies, like for expectant mothers. And lastly, We should provide alternative cheap sources of energy, like gas, solar energy, and reduce the electricity rates per unit to make it affordable for the islanders.
In your report, were there any human rights concerns related to palm oil growing in Buvuma?
I think for this report we did not really tackle palm oil growing in Buvuma, but we have a report that we did where we focused on palm oil, and of course we were able to really give out our concerns in that report.
What are your concerns about palm oil growing in Buvuma?
The issue of of the workers. We found out that, of course, you know, protective gear, some are not really given protective gear. The issue of long working hours.
Casualization of labor.
Yes. The issue of having no contracts really for when people are working. You find they do not have any kind of contracts. And you find that some are not even given leave, either maternity leave or annual leave. So those are some of the issues that we found out, but details can be found in the reports.
And of course, some individuals were struggling to, you know, fight and get, you know, the right compensation for their land. They were saying that the land was undervalued and they were never given the right monies for their land. Is that true?
Yes, very much.
Any recommendations to this effect?
Maybe what we would recommend is for really government to always include people and let programs be people-centered, so that at least we look at the human rights implications of a certain program before it is really implemented.
Away from Buvuma, of course, the other human rights concerns are in the Karamoja sub-region related to the extractive industries within this region. What were the human rights concerns within the previous year, 2021?
Thank you so much. The
Chapter
human rights,
4.
Chapter 4. That is Chapter 4 of our annual report. And the human rights concerns that we found out in regard to child labor, where we found out that many children were being involved or were working in the mines. Then the issue of environmental degradation, that one really we cannot fail to speak about it. And also the limited free and prior informed consent, where you find people are not really informed of what is going to take place in those areas. They are not really consulted. And that's why I said the issue of consulting people, the issue of projects having a people-centered approach is really good. And the limited capacity among communities. You find communities are not aware of what is really taking place. They're being displaced from their lands, and they are not really, do not know what is taking place. And also the issue of women, most especially being denied the right to participate in governance in the mineral resources and land, and limited platform for communities to air out their views or to bring out their grievances. We also found that it's a bit limited in Karamoja region. Yeah.
So in a bit to alleviate all this, what recommendations did you throw towards government?
There are also quite a number of recommendations, but we noted that the government should fast track the mining and minerals bill, which is, we are happy that Parliament passed.
Yes.
It's waiting to be assented by the President. So we believe that if that bill is put in place, most of these issues would be catered for. And also we recommended that the government should support and formulate the artisanal small-scale miners into groups and associations to facilitate them be more organized in the mining, and also include their market bargaining powers and acquisition of local licenses and financing for small organized groups. Then, the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development and Mineral Police should monitor the enforcement of restoration practices.
All right.
And we found out, I actually did not mention it, but we found out that there's a lot of alcohol use in Karamoja. Most of them really take alcohol.
Among the young ones?
Even among the miners themselves.
I see.
So we recommended that at least the government should come up with an ordinance to control the alcohol consumption in the area. And also, that one, the other one was on the mining laws and regulations that government should really focus on.
All right, we are breaking down the 24th annual report of the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Remember, in their 21st, 22nd and the 23rd annual reports, they did come out with 289 recommendations to the 32 ministries, departments and agencies within this country. But guess how many of those recommendations were taken up by the MDAs? Only 75, accounting for only 24% of those recommendations, meaning over 74% of those recommendations coming in from the Uganda Human Rights Commission were neglected. Non-compliance. And so I would like to know what strategies UHRC has put in place to ensure that these MDAs comply. And that takes me to chapter 5 of the report that actually focuses on the enforced disappearances of persons within this country and the human rights concerns that arose out of that in 2021. All right, Ruth Sechindi, you and I know very well that I've been waiting for this report to come out since last year, especially when the NUP supporters were being roughed up, disappeared left, right and center and held in illegal detention centers. Chapter 5 talks about enforcement or enforced disappearances in Uganda and the human rights implications. Let's break down your findings.
Okay, I will talk about enforced disappearances, but I wanted to add my voice to Diana's.
Indeed, on Karamoja.
On Karamoja, on Buguvuma.
And okay.
You see, just like Diana has said, islands are very far from the mainland.
Indeed.
And many times government programs do not reach islands. I give an example of Kalangala. It has 84 islands,
Indeed.
Kalangala district. And these are scattered. The farthest is in Nkese. In Nkese, it takes 3 hours to from mainland Kalangala to Nkese. And it would require 150 liters. And that means just compare distance between here and Barra. And so if you have a pregnant mother,
who is
that pregnant mother and is being referred to Health Center 4 in Kalangala Main, they have to travel that distance to get to Kalangala Main.
Chances are they might succumb on the way.
Now, when it comes, like Diana has talked about education, children have to pedal to go into canoes from one island to another to find a primary school. So schools, primary and secondary, are not on these islands. So for the ordinary person, just imagine you or your child getting to a little boat in the morning to pedal and get to another island.
Indeed. So Mr.
And during seasons of storms and the waters are, these kids sleep in classrooms, including the teachers, because they can't go home. It's also very dangerous on the lake, on those canoes.
Wait, they have to sleep in the classroom?
Yes. And some of them actually study in trees. So when we talk about Kalangala and Buvuma, someone will say, what is the big deal about it?
Yes.
These are in a worse situation than many parts
Looks
of the
more like they're cut off from the rest of the country.
So basically, electricity is not there, and just a few have solar panels, those who can afford. The HIV/AIDS rates are high because majority are men, and the few women that are there are shared. So the situation is really dire.
So, Mr. President, I heard you the other day, and I saw you scratching your head. So hard to find out why our young people are not finishing, primary, or finishing primary and not going into secondary school. So Buvuma and Kalangala are the possible examples we could throw at you, Mr. President.
Yes.
The children are not studying. They have no access to electricity, no access to schools, no access to transportation. So the suffering within Buvuma and Kalangala is so dire, it could be replicated in so many other parts of the country, and that's the reason as to why children are not finishing primary, and those who are finishing can't actually ably go to secondary school. So, Mr. President, please take note. Go ahead, Ruth.
Yes, and the other that I wanted to add on Karamoja, and why am I adding this is because I'm very passionate about it.
Indeed.
I know Diana is, but every time you go to Karamoja, you're saying, wow, Karamoja is a very rich sub-county. It has over 58 minerals, and I'm talking about gold, mica, uranium, platinum. I mean,
it's our DRC here in Uganda.
Yes, cobalt. I don't know, marble, granite. You get there and you look at these beautiful stones, and you are like floored.
Why have we failed to make this work for the citizens near these resources?
If this sub-region is this rich, how come the people are some of the poorest in the country?
Indeed.
And so we noted that they have concerns around surface rights where they feel they've been cheated or they have not been paid.
Indeed.
Issues of, what do they call it, royalties. The districts are complaining. They don't know how much the trucks are taking, because the truck comes and they come and the communities are like, because of poverty. So the whole community or the whole village spends 2 weeks breaking stone that will be taken to make cement. And when they break this stone, a truck comes and they're telling us they're taking the truck at 150, 250. So that 250 has to be divided by families in a community. So it means everyone will take like 20,000 or 10,000 or 15. So you realize that the vicious cycle, poverty will continue.
Indeed.
Children out of school, they're also trying to make a contribution. We found many with wounds, sore hands because of lack of protective gear. We found that because they are busy mining, they miss the one season that comes to grow food, so they have no food. We also found that sometimes they use corrosive mercury, and they're using their hands, which is dangerous to their lives. So the right to health is compromised. So there were many issues around, and Diana has given the recommendations that we made. When it comes to enforced disappearances,
before you go to enforced disappearances, I wanted to talk about the investors within this region and what we can do to safeguard the people working for them.
If you look
the
at
Investment Code Act of 2019,
yes.
Does it compel the investors to put in place conducive working environments that actually safeguard the health of the workers?
Yes, and Uganda, we have come up, we enacted and Cabinet passed it, the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights.
Indeed.
And this is supposed to protect all government, all employers, all persons who are investing, and all government ministries, departments, and agencies are required to ensure that there is protection of that businessman and that person who is dealing with extractives and all that.
From palm oil in Buvuma to the extractive industries in Karamoja, there is no protective gear, there is no such thing. The investors are actually doing what they want.
What we noticed,
they're not adhering to the investment code.
There are many licensed companies mining different things, many licensed companies. Others, I think, register and they sell off their interests. And the districts are saying, we have these many. They're in our report.
Yes.
We have all these people, but where are the royalties?
Indeed.
We are not benefiting from the wealth that is beneath our ground, our soils. So, and we feel that that money would help in them, supporting them in building schools, hospitals, clinics, and all that, the development of Karamoja. So there's a lot of anguish, there's a lot of dissatisfaction, and amongst the population, and they feel that they need to be helped, and that's where we came in to highlight some of these concerns, these issues that they were raising, to see how they can be addressed. Companies have to ensure that they do corporate social responsibility. They have to ensure that when they are benefiting from a community, they give back to that community. They do not exploit that community, and that's why we even summoned one of the companies and said, come. Something is fundamentally wrong.
Indeed.
So we're still handling that matter. But I think investors have a duty of care and have a duty towards the people where they invest.
And indeed, Ms. Ruth Sechindi, you spoke about anger. Of course, anger and despair is still pretty much prevalent among most of the Ugandans, especially those who had their loved ones forcefully disappeared in 2020. I'm talking about the NUP supporters who were roughly taken into illegal detention centers around November up to date. Some individuals were rounded up and put into illegal detention centers. Talk to us about that situation.
When it came to enforced disappearances, as many of you may recall, following the election, prior the electoral day, the election day, there were arrests. And the media was awash with stories of drones. Drones, you could call them matatus.
Indeed.
And people apparently disappeared, or allegedly disappeared, and their whereabouts were not known by relatives. And NUP came out and alleged and indicated that their people were missing. There was a public outcry. The commission also got involved, and we also started a manhunt for many of these people. We started moving from one prison to another, from one police cell to another, trying to identify and locate.
Number one, do these illegal detention centers exist in Uganda?
What do you call illegal detention
Like when you were investigating, did you actually find that there were illegal detention centers where people are being kept incommunicado?
Incommunicado, yes. So when we visited the police stations, and we didn't find these people. And we reached out to the relevant government agencies and said the people have to be produced before court or released. Among us, and the people who complained and brought their names, the names of their loved ones, were 69. Following our interventions, 64 were found and released, and by the time we reported yesterday, the 5 were still missing. However, be that as it may.
So according to your investigations, only 69 people were missing.
The ones who reported to us.
Okay.
So then
65 were found.
Yes. Then there were lists that came from government, from Honorable Jeje Odom.
Yes.
And there were lists from
Nope. Over 500
and all
people
of those are in the area. So we try to compare who's where. So we found some who had been produced before courts of law, and those who were before military court, all those that people did not know their whereabouts. So for us as a commission, what we've been saying, okay, if you arrest, suspects have rights. They have a right to inform their relatives on their whereabouts.
Indeed.
They have a right to know why they were being detained. So let us have more communication with their lawyers, with their doctors, with their relatives, so that they know where they are. And so why we wrote this is to give an account of the missing persons and how we can continue to track them down.
So there were more than 69 in the detention centers.
Yes, and we have listed numbers. Allow me to check this.
All right, the numbers you're going to be giving them to us after this short break to allow you to look for those numbers. That is Ms. Ruth Sechindi, the Director Monitoring and Inspections at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. She's not alone. We also do have Diana Akampereza. She's a Human Rights Officer working for the same commission. We are breaking down their 24th annual report that comprises of 12 chapters, and the first 8 are actually focusing on thematic issues, and the rest, the 3, are focusing on the interventions of the Uganda Human Rights Commission. And the last chapter is focusing on our compliance as Uganda to international and regional treaty bodies. We're going to take a very short break and return with more on this conversation. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and many thanks for staying with us. In its 21st, 22nd and 23rd annual reports, the Uganda Human Rights Commission made over 289 recommendations to the 32 ministries, departments and agencies when it comes to compliance to human rights within Uganda here. Surprisingly, only 75 recommendations were taken up. We want to know why and what the UHRC is doing to ensure that these MDAs comply with these recommendations. One case in point, like Chapter 5 on enforced disappearances, they could have given recommendations to the different MDAs on how best to observe human rights within this country, and they neglected these recommendations or threw them under the bus. So we'd like to know why and what strategies are being birthed to ensure that these MDAs actually do comply, because when human rights are observed, it is the key to the development of any given country or area. Without observance of human rights, we will always deteriorate when it comes to development and so forth. All right, Ruth Sechindi is the Director of Monitoring and Inspections. She's here with us, and we also do have Akampereza Diana, another Human Rights Officer at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. So, Ruth Sechindi, you were telling us about the enforced disappearances and what kind of recommendations you did have for the central government, and you were still breaking down the numbers of those who were still in detention. 186 plus within the court-martial. Go ahead.
Yeah, and NOP submitted a list of 333, but when you look at the 333, some of them are in the court-martial or ended up being released. We made a number of recommendations. Indeed. Because issues of Uganda has not yet ratified the International Covenant on Enforced Disappearances, but that
is it intentional?
No, but we have ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which really talks about people not being arbitrarily detained. So we made recommendations that it would be good for Uganda to ratify the second optional protocol to the ICCPR. We also made a recommendation that Uganda should ratify the International Covenant on Enforced Disappearances. We also made a recommendation that people should be produced before court in a timely manner, and that all persons should be accounted. You
see, before the Uganda Human Rights Commission was not fully constituted. Many Kagwa rest in peace was not around, so the tribunal couldn't sit. But now we have Honorable Maria Mwangadia, you have Honorable Shifra Lukwago, Honorable Rabu Kurukuru, Jacqueline, you do have Honorable Crispin Kaheru in there, and we also did lose one commissioner. But still, we do have 4 in that regard. So a tribunal could still sit and investigate these cases, or even bring about some kind of justice to these people who are crying. Bring us up to speed with the works of the tribunal.
You are speaking to the converted. Now, yes, the works of the tribunal. The tribunal is already hearing matters. And
related to enforced disappearances?
Well, the matters that were... Remember, we didn't have...
Backlog.
We didn't have a commission for almost 2 years. So they have a backlog. And the way it works is fast in, fast out.
Indeed.
So we haven't yet started working on this. So there are many people who are in the... in the queue waiting for their matters.
Aren't you afraid that this one issue, before even completed, it's going to bite you again in the neck by 2025 or 2026?
Why?
We are getting into another campaign period. NUP is still pretty much a party that wants to put down President Museveni as far as the presidency is concerned. So they are going to campaign, and we are going to continue seeing enforced disappearances. If the tribunal hasn't sat right now to talk about this issue, don't you think it's going to come a second time in 2025?
No, they'll be hard.
Without remedies?
They'll be hard. They are trying to expeditiously handle these matters.
I see.
And I don't want to be a pessimist by thinking that more violations will occur. I want to hope that they will not.
Even up to now, they're still happening. People are still being,
sure?
Yes, forcefully disappeared.
Who do you know who has been? I don't know. Please share the information so that we can join the families in trying to identify the whereabouts of these people. I don't know about that, but would like to. When there's a violation, every life matters. Would want to intervene into that. So if you don't have any information, please let us know.
Away from politics, there's this young gentleman who is accused of stealing, of being a thief. But then the police instead went and took his whole family. They arrested his whole family, not the suspect himself. So we are looking at such cases. It might not be politics, it could be something else. But then this young person, now the whole family has been arrested, and they are looking for a suspect. But what does that have to do with the family? Is that how investigations are conducted?
After this, I think she will share with me that I don't know about
things are happening within this country, Ruth Sechindi. And indeed, I pray that you put your hand or put a lead on this. Indeed. All right, let's talk about the plight of urban refugees in Uganda. What were your findings?
Okay, when it comes to refugees, Uganda is the biggest host country in Africa. We're doing very well. We're a very welcoming nation.
Yes, right.
And we have over 1.5 million refugees. That's a whole country, bigger than Mongolia.
Around 1.6 now.
1.6. So having 1.5 million people in your country and you open your doors, really we commend Uganda for that heart and that willingness to host refugees.
You have districts like Moyo where you do have more refugees than the locals. You have Ajumani where you do have more refugees than the locals. So indeed I get you when you
That's
make
very
that
commendable.
statement.
And you have seen other countries like right now if you go to the UK, you'll be returned to Rwanda.
Indeed.
Because they have signed an agreement. Many countries don't want to bring in refugees or foreigners, but Uganda extends a hand and opens its doors to allow refugees, people who are in conflict.
I actually thought that was a joke. I actually thought they wouldn't reroute people from the UK up to Rwanda. I thought it was fake news, but that's the world we are living in. Go ahead.
So when we do that, we really commend the country for doing this. And the way our refugee policy is commendable, including the fact that we allow them to be wherever they're willing. If you don't stay in the settlement and you opt to live in an urban place or any other place, then the government will not be able to provide for you
Isn't there any tussle for resources in jurisdictions like Moi and Ajumani, where you do have more refugees than the locals, pressure on the environment,
yes,
deforestation and so forth?
Those are issues of refugees because refugees need fuel. And I mean to cook, they need charcoal. So what has happened is the deforestation is massive. And so there are programs around how to regain back the afforestation and how to give them alternatives when it comes to fuel. And fuel, I mean firewood and not all other, other sources of cooking. But when they come, the few that end up in urban areas, we noted that they have so many challenges. And the challenges include discrimination. You have where we have some Ugandans who do not like foreigners, so they face xenophobia. We have seen issues of housing. Majority live in Makindye, slummy places. Mashindye, Old Kampala, or places where they find their own, and so they share rooms. You can find 7 or 15 in one little room. They face some of them don't have documentation, the required documentation to show that they're refugees. There are issues of exploitation. The women sometimes turn to prostitution. We've had stories around Ethiopians, Eritreans, Somalis, and the exploitation that they go through, or they work for very, very little money because they're exploited. They don't know where to find alternative
Work
jobs.
permits are a problem.
The access to justice is a problem. When they're abused or they're violated, they have nowhere to report. They don't even know how to go about the processes in Uganda. Then there are issues of education. They may not have money to top up in public schools, issues of health. So, and they also face the same issues that Ugandans face, but at a larger scale. So in view of that, we have asked government to also consider refugees in urban areas and find a way of supporting them.
Not only those in refugee settlements.
Yes, because we have realized that these ones are, and sometimes it's so hard for them to go back to register in the settlements. So we have called on government to also consider them and support them in the best way that they can.
All right, let's also break down the juvenile justice system in Uganda. Bring us up to speed with the state of administration of the juvenile justice system within our country.
Juveniles,
the young ones who are in conflict with the law.
When we talk about juveniles, we mean, you see, the age of criminality or criminal responsibility is 12. 12. So when you're 11 years, 10 years, 7 years, and you can't be arrested. Nothing can happen because the law, and actually, your brain has not matured enough to know what is right and wrong. So children below 12 years cannot be arrested for criminal liability. Even if they kill their parents, you can't arrest them. However, after that age, between that 12 and 18, okay, before you cross the threshold to 18, then you can be arrested. You can be held criminally liable. So that's the one we call
the juvenile justice system.
We call juvenile. They are still minors. They are still children, but they are not yet adults. So we call them juveniles.
So if they are minors, why are we keeping them in the same jail cells as adults?
So we do not find that in prisons, but those that we have found in police, and just a few. And it's because they don't have places to put these children. And many times the juveniles they arrest are for capital offenses. So you steal chicken, they will not arrest you. So they try to...
But then they put you in jail with someone who stole a car. You could be inducted within jail.
The children that they arrest, most of the children, they have committed capital offenses.
Yes, but they are kept with the grown-ups who have, executed bad or worse crimes.
No, upon arrest, when police cells do not have, majority don't have female cells, and also do not have children's juvenile cells. And so the police is constrained on where to put, especially women and children, the juveniles. So that becomes a challenge.
Indeed.
But the other challenge that we noticed is delays in resolving the cases of juveniles, so that they spend long periods on remand. We also noted that Uganda has just 7 juvenile homes or remand juvenile, call them remand, they're called what?
Remand homes.
Remand homes.
Remand homes.
Yeah.
Okay, we call them remand homes. And they're just 7. And we have one in Bali, one in Fort Portal, one in Gulu, one in Naguru. Where is the other 7? Okay, around
So
that.
we need to create more to handle
We
the
don't
influx.
need more. We want to divert children from the criminal justice system.
Indeed.
Because now, when you commit an offense, or your child commits an offense, and you're in Barra, then that child has to be taken to Fort Portal. It would take you a long distance. You have to travel a long distance to go and check on your child. So we have noted that children are not visited in prisons. And we also note that the infrastructure is not child-friendly. Where you're in police, they put them in a cell. Police tries. They find a room. Sometimes they give them to one of the police officers to stay with them in the home. They try within the limitations that they have.
I see.
But there are no juvenile-friendly facilities in, for example, police cells. So that remains a challenge. And so, and also parents have abrogated their duty to take care of their children. And this is so unfortunate, where parents expect the states or the state to look after their children. So those are some of the concerns we've had when it comes to juvenile justice, because we want to divert children from the criminal justice system. When you detain children, you actually harden them. And it's a recipe of having hardened criminals.
Indeed. We are on chapter 7 and we might not be able to break down all the chapters. And in the interest of time, there's one unique question I've been posing every time we came back for a break. And that is the recommendations that you've made to the different MDAs, 32 MDAs, but they took up only 75 recommendations. So what kind of strategies have you laid as the Uganda Human Rights Commission to ensure that these MDAs comply with your recommendations? Only 75 out of 289. What does that mean to you?
Well, when we talk about human rights and states' obligation, states have other primary duty bearers, and they have an obligation to respect rights, to protect rights, and to fulfill rights. So when we make these recommendations, we are tagging it onto the state's obligation to do the 3, to respect, protect, and fulfill. So that's why we evaluate the state or government to see how it's complying with our recommendations. Now, we would have wanted them to have them 100%. But if you look at economic, social, and cultural rights, they have progressive. You have to realize them progressively. For example, if we say build schools in Kalangala, it would take at least 3, 4, 5 years to build them, because economic, social, and cultural rights are progressive. So even though we say 74 have been implemented, there are those that are for economic, social, and cultural rights which need progressive realization. It's a process before you achieve it. If we say put electricity in Kabong, it would take at least 6 years to get electricity there. So we take that also into consideration. Now, that does not apply to civil and political rights. Civil and political rights, when we make recommendations, we expect it there and then. Stop arbitrary detention. That does not have financial implications. It just needs institutional reorganization, attitude change, and implementation.
So if they couldn't adhere to these recommendations in your 21st, 22nd, 23rd report, so in your 24th report, what makes you so sure that they are going to adhere to the recommendations that you are giving them?
So what we have done is we have an interministerial committee, and that is under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it works very closely with the Ministry of Justice. And these are some of the issues we discuss. And then there is also the Parliamentary Committee on Human Rights. The Parliamentary Committee on Human Rights summons MDAs. When we make recommendations, it summons them and gives them timelines. Please implement this and this and this within this time. So it's also an accountability institution that works very closely. And most of its work rotates around what we write in the annual report, and they follow up on our recommendations.
All right.
So we are sure that with Parliament on our side, we shall work towards achieving many of these.
That is Ms. Sechindi Ruth, the Director Monitoring and Inspections at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Let's also bring in Akampereza Diana. Let's talk about access to electricity. This is Chapter 8, access to electricity in Uganda and the human rights concerns involved.
All right, thank you so much. As a commission, we also interested ourselves in learning more about the issue of electricity.
Indeed.
And of course, getting to know that electricity is a backbone of so many other activities that a country can do. And also considering the fact that our Uganda Vision 2040 emphasizes the issue of electricity as being a driver of socio-economic transformation in the country. And of course, looking at the issue of shifting from the peasantry to a modern industrialized society, electricity is very, very important for the development of the country. As a commission, of course, during our findings, we noted the issue of affordability, where we found out that electricity is not really affordable for the common man or common woman down in the village. And also the issue of quality of electricity, the issue of physical access to electricity. I'm sure that there are those down villages that they have not really accessed electricity. And the issue of the limited budgetary allocation. Indeed. And the issue also of course, resources. People really can't
recommendations
really
to that
afford.
effect.
The recommendations that we made, one is to Parliament that it should amend the Electricity Act of 1999 to ensure diversity of electricity sources, especially to promote off-grid solar that can serve vulnerable groups better. The Ministry of Energy and Development should prioritize connection of all health facilities to the national grid. National grid is where electricity is there full time. They do not lose out. And of course, we've seen cases of mothers dying while giving birth because of lack of electricity and those other things that we've always really found out that are really not good. The issue, we also recommended that the Electricity Regulatory Authority should revise tariffs to make power more affordable for Ugandans.
I see.
If you can know the amount that we pay for a unit, it's around 1,000, and it's really not affordable for the poor Ugandan like me. Yes. Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development should also make deliberate efforts to increase funding towards the electricity sector to boost especially towards activities directed towards expansion of the grid line.
All right. That is Akampereza Diana, Human Rights Officer, working with the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Ruth Sechindi, Chapter 9 focuses on emerging human rights concerns in 2021. One focuses on the disarmament in the Karamoja sub-region, social media and the human rights concerns on that, banishment of people in the Acholi sub-region, human rights concerns arising from the terrorist attacks, the twin bombing attacks around, Parliamentary Avenue and, Kochi Towers. There's also that and teenage pregnancies. But I would like to focus on the Karamoja disarmament issue and also the human rights concerns that arose from the terrorist attacks. Those two, because we are running out of time. We have like 2 minutes.
The disarmament, you see, Karamoja has for years had instability and the culture, the fights between one tribe and another, and at one point it stopped. And following this, yes, and unfortunately, lately, since last year, we realized that the warriors that were attacking again, and they were getting more weapons.
What recommendations did you make?
The question was, where are they getting it and why? It's still a culture thing to acquire cattle and steal cattle. And so we are saying, but along the way, during the disarmament, lives are lost and all that. So we are saying that let's go back into community sensitization so that the culture of owning guns and stealing cattle stops, because it's a culture thing.
That is okay. Then on the human rights concerns arising from the terrorist attacks.
From the terrorist attack, I think it's more of early warning. and ensuring that we look out for we are each other's brother's keeper, and also working with security to ensure that we keep our country safe, and also for security to be vigilant, more vigilant. They did a good job. We think they can do better, and the community has a role to play in ensuring that there is peace and security in the country.
And your last chapter focuses on our compliance to international treaties. Bring us up to speed with that.
Uganda has, last year we realized that Uganda made headway in its obligations, particularly its reporting obligations. We noted that Uganda reported to the UPR, that is Universal Periodic Review, and that we made reports to the International Committee on the CRC, that's the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the one on economic, social and cultural rights. So we commend government for that, and we are saying that those which are pending should also be implemented.
That is Ms. Sechindi Ruth, the Director Monitoring and Inspections at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. She was not alone. We also did have Ms. Akampereza Diana. She is a human rights officer also working for the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Ladies, thank you so much for having made the time to help us, break down this report and what it means for this country.
Thank you.
Thank you very
And
much.
indeed, one word or one statement to go with. Yes, we'd like you to know that for any given area to develop, yes, observance of human rights have to be at the center of that country's priorities. So when you observe human rights, it's key for the development of your country. My name is Romeo Busiku. Have yourselves a lovely day.